Welcome back to Inside Politics. Our guest today is Dr. Thomas Schwartz, political science professor at Vanderbilt University. We're talking about the 1 year in office for President Joe Biden. Professor Schwartz, obviously the virus has flared back up again. How did it get out of control again on him? Did he not anticipate what was coming? We still see all these conflicting messages coming out of the CDC about what to do about quarantines, about wearing masks and things like this. It doesn't seem he's been able to get control of this, and he's actually lost control. Do you think he thinks things are better now than they have been? Do you think people believe that?
I think people do believe it because I do think aspects of daily life are getting slowly back to normal. The problem is that I think the messaging is quite confused. There is a lot out there in terms of misinformation, the degree, giving out masks, giving out tests. All of this seems to have complicated the messaging of the CDC. I feel that on this one, he's been affected by simply things that they can't control, namely the progress of the variant and other issues. But the problem is that they projected this idea of victory in the summer, basically declaring victory over the virus, and now they've had to go back on that. And I think that has all been partly the damaging aspect, that they've had to reverse themselves and change. But honestly, I think ultimately Omicron seems to be something that will peak and that you will see gradually perhaps a greater return to normal.
Another element that perhaps the Biden administration underestimated has been inflation. It's now at a 40-year high. This is a byproduct of the pandemic, but they seem to think it would only be brief. It's lasted now for several months and shows no signs of letting up. The presidents always get too much credit when the economy is good and perhaps too much blame when it's bad. But what can the president do to turn this around? I mean, this could be issue number one, if you believe in the old adage that it's the economy stupid that's the number thing on voters' minds.
Absolutely. No, I think the president needs to take some concerted actions. He could, for example, try and increase or temporarily increase America's energy supplies by encouraging. I doubt he would reverse himself on the pipelines that he canceled at the beginning of his administration, but he might want to take some action that would encourage American prospecting for gas and oil. These types of things that would reduce that aspect of prices. But I do think he needs to be seen as being very concerned about inflation, because inflation really has, now it's at a 40-year high. The country had gotten away from thinking about it very much, and now that it's hit, it's had a much greater effect than might have been the case had there been some preparation or background for it. So I do think he needs to do something here.
Given all these challenges, Democrats have any chance to be able to hold on to the House and the Senate, or Republicans likely to take both those bodies and perhaps by large numbers?
Well, there's an old quote from which I checked this morning because I knew I would get this question from Harold Wilson, that a week is a long time in politics. And that Harold Wilson was a British prime minister in the 60s. I thought it might have been, there may be American versions of this, but it's absolutely the case that right now, if the elections were held, the president would lose probably decisively, probably lose both the House and the Senate. I think that given some things that could take place over the course of the next months, namely the easing of the pandemic, perhaps an easing in inflation, or at least the sense that the country, that he was doing something about it, he could conceivably, I think, minimize the losses, maybe even hold on to the Senate, since the map there is actually more favorable to the Democrats than it is to the Republicans in terms of which states have seats at risk. But nevertheless, I think this is one of those cases where a lot could happen in the in-between time, and so I don't think the Republicans should spike the ball in the end zone yet. I think that they've got this clearly there, but the Democrats really face an uphill battle.
The pushback by the president during his news conference this week, and he said a record-length news conference over 2 hours, to show he's up to the job. He started pushing back on the Republicans, saying, well, what are they for? We know what they're against, but what are they for? Is that likely to be the level to get the focus off the midterms from him and focus on, well, what will you get if you vote for the Republicans, and try to say that's not a good thing for voters to do?
That's right. He has to refocus the issues onto what are the Republicans actually proposing? What do they want to do? I think actually this is going to be a bit difficult because, of course, a party out of power always has a certain leeway in terms of what they propose. And the party in power is usually held much more accountable. Nevertheless, I think he could make some progress with that, as well as tying the Republicans to Donald Trump, who is still the biggest incentive for Democrats to vote.
In the Ukraine situation, the president kind of muddied the waters during his news conference this week. He said, well, maybe if it's only a little incursion to go into Ukraine, that might be okay, or they wouldn't perhaps have these strong sanctions or whatever it is they're going to do. What's a little incursion? I think he had to come back and clean that up, didn't he?
Absolutely. No, they had to clean it up almost immediately. It was a big mistake. I mean, it is one of those cases, the president thinking out loud. And it perhaps even has the benefit of being what used to be said, the joke that a gaffe in Washington is when you tell the truth. What Biden was saying was, in effect, something of the truth. It's just not something he should have said out loud. The truth is that, of course, if the Russians do something relatively minor in the Ukraine, there won't be the degree of unity among the allies as to how fierce the sanctions should be imposed and how strict economic links like the Nord Stream pipeline that Germany wants to keep open, whether it should be canceled or not. On the other hand, by saying that, he seemed to be giving a certain degree of permission to Vladimir Putin to test his limits, to see how much Putin territory can grab in territory or in terms of cyber attacks that he undertakes. The
president indicates that he and his NATO allies are going to have a strong, quick, and decisive very punitive response to all this if the Russians do invade, but he won't say exactly what those are going to be. Is that because he and the NATO allies have not agreed on what that's going to be? And are the NATO allies on board to help? Is the Congress and the country on board to do what the president wants to do, if they even know what it is?
This is the real challenge, and this is one of the reasons why Putin might think this is an opportune time. There is the sense that perhaps the NATO allies are not on board, that Germany, particularly the most important ally, is not really willing to take the types of steps that would be really harmful to the Russian economy by cutting off gas supplies or oil supplies. So in that sense, I think Biden is facing a real challenge of actually uniting the allies as well as the American people on an issue that he has not sufficiently campaigned for.
Dr. Thomas Schwartz is our guest. He's a political science professor at Vanderbilt University. We're talking about the challenges both now and in the future that are being faced by President Joe Biden, who celebrated his, or at least commemorated or observed his one-year anniversary in office this week. Back to continue our conversation on the other side of this break.